down to be 1 in 40.
In addition to health, Gates thinks farming will get far more productive for the world's poor.
Well, to get agricultural productivity up, you want many factors working in your favor. You want better seeds. You want farmers to adopt the best seeds. The farmers have got to be a lot more educated because they can often grow 2 crops in a season, and the way they deal with soil health by rotating the crops can make a big difference. They also need a credit system because if they don't have the money to get fertilizer, that alone will cut their productivity very substantially. And so that farmer education system, that's sometimes called the extension system, the R&D to make those better seeds, which is really very underfunded, by managing those things well, we predict that we'll get African productivity up to 1.5 times where it is today. And that will get Africa to the point where even with its population growth, somewhat worse weather, instead of importing food, it will be able to feed itself.
So when you talk about developing better seeds, that to me sounds like you're talking about GMOs without really talking about GMOs. Is that a term that you're avoiding because it's a boogeyman? Even though when people figure out what GMOs are, they're generally okay with it. It seems like we're not talking about actually big ag companies doing GMO research.
Well, GMOs are very well accepted in some countries like the United States and not as well accepted in Europe. The African countries will have a choice of whether to use those tools. And there is quite a bit of improvement still available with conventional breeding. But in this time frame, the GMO-derived seeds will provide far better productivity, better drought tolerance, salinity tolerance. And if the safety is proven, then the African countries will be among the biggest beneficiaries. And so by making sure that their safety review is well funded, so it's all done on a basis, the same as we do for medicines. I mean, after all, medicines, some are very dangerous, and yet, every country says if something goes through a safety review, they're not going to deny themselves the benefit of breakthrough medicine. So I think most of Africa will see this as a way to improve their productivity, but it's a sovereign decision. No one makes that for them.
Right. So can you step in and provide sort of like a quasi-regulatory oversight and say, we've invested in Monsanto, we've invested in Cargill, we've looked at this, and our foundation will provide the vouchsafe for these things, or are you going to leave that up to each of these nations to do alone when they might not have the resources to do it?
Well, we can fund training so that they have scientists who can staff their safety commission. We can make sure that the studies that they're done and done well. We can incent the companies that are making these great seeds for rich countries. We can work with them to make sure that it's at least available, actually at a lower price, because that tiered pricing where poor countries get a better price has worked so well in medicines. That same type of thing we can make sure happens with these crops. But at the end of the day, they get to decide anything about which vaccines, which drugs, which seeds are okay. That's their country, but their expertise is developing. So I feel like they'll make a good choice.
And I want to talk about pricing just real quick. So I have a quote here from the UN Conference on Trade and Development 2013 report, and I'm just going to read it real fast. The perception that there is a supply-side problem is questionable. Hunger and malnutrition are mainly related to the lack of purchasing power and or inability of rural people to be self-sufficient. And so I guess my question is this really about developing more crops, more supply, or is it really about the income inequality in these countries?
Well, food doesn't magically move itself from one place to another. Otherwise, the sinks of rich world homes, all that nice stuff that, it's good stuff, clean, doesn't get eaten, it would be there. And we do have population increase where Africa in particular will grow a lot. And then we do have, as people eat more meat, there's an inefficiency that you have to grow more grain to create the equivalent number of calories in meat. So we have to increase world food productivity quite a bit, almost double it by 2050 between all the different factors. And one of the few places where there's acreage that's not being used and that the productivity is way below the world average is in Africa. And so it's wonderful that many of the poorest people in the world are African farmers. getting their productivity up so they can have more nutritious food, more food, and meeting that global demand. Those two things are going to go together. And so it's a huge win-win that as we help them, we help feed the world.
Let me ask it much more directly. Is it better to invest sort of in the supply side, or is it better for you, as a very wealthy man, to just buy people food?
Well, the impact of a more productive seed used by millions of farmers, it multiplies that R&D investment, by factors of 1,000. It's like writing a piece of software that millions of people get to use. Would I have been better to go to somebody's typewriter and type up a Word document for them, or instead of using Excel, I'm actually good at multiplication. I could have done the multiplication for them, or should I create Excel and then it can do a lot of multiplications for a lot of people. So there is something that only philanthropy and government can come by and do, and it's far more impactful than doing that as a handout. The scale of government as a whole is gigantic compared to philanthropy. Philanthropy has to pick the risky, diverse things that neither the market nor government are going to do. And R&D, or pilot schemes to improve delivery, those are the kinds of things that philanthropy is unique at driving forward.
Gates' vision for banking and finance is perhaps his most idealistic. He believes mobile payments and microtransactions will allow the world's poor more and better access to financial institutions and credit systems, even if problems like regulation and technology lock-in aren't fully solved.
Part of it is that the fixed cost of ATM machines and bank tellers and all that means that small transactions are money losing in the old system. There's just too much labor, too much paperwork, too much physical activity. In the new digital realm, where we take and build a debit card equivalent that's just your cell phone, as we've seen in a few pioneering countries like Kenya with a system called M-Pesa, or talk about the Bangladesh bKash, it's a newer one, but that's catching on pretty quickly. There, even 50-cent type transactions, you can have an under 2% fee. And so it starts to be economic to bank the very poorest, not with branches or ATMs, but simply with the cell phone. And so now all these benefits of, okay, I'm a farmer, when I sell my crop, help me to set aside enough for next year's seed and fertilizer, or my kid's going to school, help me do the set aside so I won't be surprised when those fee requests come in. That is going to be delivered through that